The Indiana Fever front office just made the biggest mistake of the season, and Caitlin Clark is the one paying for it. Wake up, Indiana. This isn't bad luck. This is a front office watching a disaster unfold in slow motion and doing absolutely nothing to stop it. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how the Fever front office failed their franchise player and why this season might already be slipping away. And look, I know this hurts to hear. Nobody wants to watch a generational talent like Caitlin Clark get let down by the people who are supposed to be building around her. But somebody has to say it out loud, because staying quiet doesn't fix anything. If this video meant something to you, if you're tired of watching front offices fail the players who deserve better, then do me one favor before you go. Hit subscribe. Not for me, but for every fan out there who's tired of getting fed excuses instead of accountability. This channel exists because fans like you deserve real analysis, not spin. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's hold this front office accountable together every single step of the way. We're not going anywhere, and neither should you. Let's start with the news that just broke. Damiris Dantas is done. Out for the season. Surgery completed Monday. And here's the part that should make every single Fever fan furious. The front office knew this was coming. They watched her go through rehab. They watched the symptoms persist. They watched the test results come back unfavorable week after week. And what did they do at the trade deadline, while every other contender in this league was making moves to strengthen their roster? Nothing. They sat on their hands. That's not misfortune. That's not an unlucky break. That is organizational malpractice, plain and simple. And the fans who have been screaming about this roster for weeks just got vindicated in the worst possible way. Listen to how the coaching staff talks about her. She's a connector. She's a great communicator. She's a vet. She can stretch the floor. She can knock down a shot. She gives us a different look. All of that might be true, but none of it matters now because she's gone for the year, and nobody in that front office prepared for this moment. Listen carefully to the language being used behind the scenes. Rehab didn't produce the desired effects. Translation: they knew, before the trade deadline, that surgery was likely. They knew Dantas wasn't walking through that door again this season. They knew Aaliyah Boston had zero legitimate backup at center. And Stephanie White stood at that podium talking about staying in her lane, while the front office let the deadline pass without lifting a finger. This isn't hindsight. This isn't Monday morning quarterbacking. Fans were begging for a move. Analysts were pointing out the lack of depth for weeks. The warning signs weren't subtle, they were written in neon letters. And now, fan communities like Fever Dark Side are openly calling for a vote of no confidence against the front office. When your own fan base is using words like incompetence and organizational failure, that's not just frustration talking. That's a real breakdown of trust between a franchise and the people who show up for it. And here's the real kicker. Remember who they chose to keep instead of Jalen, Justine, Pesaut? The Fever let a productive, healthy guard walk away in the offseason, someone who could actually give them real minutes. The justification at the time was always the same. Dantas brings veteran leadership, she can stretch the floor, she's a great locker room presence. Maybe all of that is true. But you know what else is true? She played exactly 0 playoff games before going under the knife. Meanwhile, Pesaut is out there contributing minutes for another team, and the Fever are left trotting out Raven Johnson as their only real backup guard option. Now let's talk about the one bright spot in all of this chaos, because it deserves recognition. Caitlin Clark has just been named WNBA Eastern Conference Player of the Week, for the 3rd time this season. Let's look at the numbers. 25.7 points per game, 53.7% from the field, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, including a triple-double and a double-double in that stretch. 3 times this season now. 3 Eastern Conference Player of the Week honors. She is doing everything humanly possible to single-handedly drag this franchise toward relevance. And what is the organization doing to support her in return? They just lost their backup center for the entire season, and did nothing to replace her. They are asking a rookie to carry a roster that gets thinner by the week, a roster that has already been exposed on the biggest stage. Look, we all knew Indiana could beat up on the Seattle Storms of the world, and there are plenty of those, trash bag teams scattered around this league. They were always going to run through the bottom feeders. But it was always going to be teams like the Minnesota Lynx that they'd need to get past to win a title, and Minnesota just handed them their worst nightmare. Not a close loss. Not a competitive game. A full exposure of every single weakness on this roster. This is the part that should genuinely terrify every Fever fan. Minnesota didn't just win, they dominated, and in doing so, they handed every other contending team in this league the exact blueprint for how to neutralize the Fever. Fresh legs in the fourth quarter. Coaching that specifically targets Indiana's thin rotation. You can run up the score on the bottom of the standings all season long, but the moment you face a real championship-caliber team, the lack of roster construction becomes fatal. And this matters because championship windows do not stay open forever. History tells us that. Dan Marino made the Super Bowl in his second season in the NFL. Everybody assumed he'd be back multiple times. He never returned. Jim Kelly went to 4 straight Super Bowls and lost all 4. Windows close. They don't wait patiently for a front office to figure out what it's doing. The assumption that Caitlin Clark will automatically get 10 more chances at a championship is exactly the kind of complacent thinking that wastes generational talent. This year mattered. Next year matters. Every single year matters. And the Fever front office just demonstrated, in the clearest way possible, that they are not treating it that way. Who is Aaliyah Boston's backup right now? Nobody. The front office knew about this problem before the deadline and did nothing about it. That's not misfortune. That's total incompetence at the highest level of the organization. Think about the position this puts everyone in. If Aaliyah Boston picks up 2 quick fouls in the first quarter, there is no legitimate replacement waiting on the bench. Opposing coaches can now attack that exact matchup relentlessly every single game because they know there's no cavalry coming. Trading away depth and replacing it with nothing isn't a strategy. It's negligence, dressed up as a plan. And here's what makes this whole situation even more damning. The Fever aren't just failing to build around Caitlin Clark, they are actively making decisions that undermine her chances of ever winning. Letting Pesaut walk wasn't addition by subtraction. It was subtraction full stop. Now think about everything Caitlin Clark has accomplished this season, in spite of all of this. Historically good numbers for a rookie. Television ratings that dwarf anything the WNBA has produced in years. Sellout crowds on the road, night after night. Highlight plays running on every sports broadcast in the country. And the front office's answer to landing a generational talent in their lap has been to surround her with the thinnest roster in the league and hope for the best. That's not a plan. That's a prayer. The Minnesota loss wasn't a fluke. It was a preview. It was every single contending team in this league watching exactly what happens to Indiana in a 7-game series. You cannot play the same 5 players 40 minutes a night and expect to survive a playoff run. You cannot have one single injury derail your entire season. You cannot walk into the postseason with glaring, obvious weaknesses and expect opposing coaches not to find them. And here's the question that should be keeping the front office up at night. What happens if Aaliyah Boston gets hurt? What happens if Caitlin Clark takes a hard fall and misses time? This roster has zero margin for error right now. They are one twisted ankle away from complete disaster, and that is not championship-level roster construction. That's hoping nothing goes wrong and being completely unprepared for the moment it does. Stephanie White talking about staying in her lane is particularly frustrating in this context. You're the head coach. You have direct input on roster construction. You understand better than anyone exactly what this team needs to compete at the highest level. Watching the trade deadline pass without the front office addressing an obvious, glaring hole isn't staying in your lane. That's being complicit in the failure. The best coaches in this league don't just quietly accept the roster they're handed. They advocate. They make it clear what's missing. They hold the front office accountable, publicly if they have to. Culture talk only goes so far. Veteran leadership matters. Locker room chemistry matters. But none of that means anything if you don't have enough competent bodies to run a functional rotation. You can have the best locker room in the league and still lose in 5 games if the team across from you is simply deeper and better prepared. This brings us back to the Dan Marino comparison, because it's more relevant than ever. Marino was a top 10 quarterback of all time. He reached the Super Bowl in year 2 of his career, and the Dolphins never built a complete team around him again. They wasted one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game because the front office couldn't put together a roster capable of winning it all. The Fever are walking that exact same path right now. They have a generational talent on their hands. A player who can single-handedly carry an offense. And they are surrounding her with a roster that cannot survive a single injury to a backup center. Fans calling this out aren't being dramatic, they're being realistic. They've seen this story before. They know exactly how it ends, and they are trying to sound the alarm before it's too late. But right now, the front office seems determined to learn this lesson the hard way, riding this thin roster straight into the playoffs, watching it get exposed by the first team with real depth, and then acting surprised when the season ends in disappointment. And Caitlin Clark will be 1 year older, with one fewer shot at a championship, through absolutely no fault of her own. So here's the bottom line. The Damiris Dantas injury is not bad luck. It is the direct, inevitable consequence of poor roster construction finally catching up with this organization. The lack of depth has been obvious since training camp. The failure to address it at the trade deadline is not an oversight. It is organizational incompetence, out in the open for everyone to see. The Fever had a real chance to fix this. They chose not to. And now they're going to live with the consequences, while Caitlin Clark does everything humanly possible to overcome front office malpractice on her own. If you're a Fever fan watching this right now, you have every right to be furious. And look, I know this hurts to hear. Nobody wants to watch a generational talent like Caitlin Clark get let down by the people who are supposed to be building around her. But somebody has to say it out loud, because staying quiet doesn't fix anything. If this video meant something to you, if you're tired of watching front offices fail the players who deserve better, then do me one favor before you go. Hit subscribe. Not for me, but for every fan out there who's tired of getting fed excuses instead of accountability. This channel exists because fans like you deserve real analysis, not spin. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's hold this front office accountable together every single step of the way. We're not going anywhere, and neither should you.